communicated about this, saying, hey, these are the new terms of service, terms of use that we added. These terms were viewed as very broad, basically giving permission to Mozilla and Firefox to collect a lot of information. Only the stuff that would help Firefox work as a browser, but the definition was pretty vague. The community didn't really appreciate how it was written. There was also the fact that those terms could be updated in the background without specifically notifying users of that change. And all the data collected was outlined in the privacy policy, which, as far as I can tell, has not changed. It seems to be sane for now, but it could also be updated in the background without specifically notifying users. People were mad about this, and so they updated their blog post initially, saying that those terms did not give them any ownership of personal data, and that they still do not collect anything other than what is outlined in the privacy policy. They also stated that they did not want to sell any personal data, even though they did remove any mention of not selling personal data from the material that used to have these mentions. And their explanation for this was that there's a new Californian law that is redefining the term selling data in a very, very broad sense. And so some stuff that Mozilla was doing could have been interpreted as selling data. Probably the partnership with Google as the default search engine, where when you type in the Omni bar of Firefox, you do send some information to Google, and that could have been covered under the selling data umbrella of this new Californian law. And then they further clarified, I think it was a week afterwards, that they did need those terms of service because people were asking, why do you need this since you've operated without it for a while? Why do you need those terms? And they said it's because new European regulators are telling us we do need to clarify this for our users. And same goes for the new Californian law as well, which makes them have to use some legal terms here and there. So did I resume this situation accurately? Did I leave anything out?
Perfect. It's absolutely perfect. You did a great job, Nick. It saved me having to share a lot of information. And
Nice.
Just to give people further background, I'm Ryan. I'm a managing director for MZLA. We do Thunderbird. So the terms of service rolled out from the corporation doesn't actually affect us, and we can choose to do something different. But as I kind of got into this further, and I'd been talking to some of the folks who were looking into this project early on, because in jurisdictions in Europe, we also receive complaints saying, hey, you don't have a terms of service, you need a terms of service. And our response was, we have our Mozilla public license, and we have our privacy policy. So we didn't really see the need for terms of service because we thought that our users were covered there. And this is where Firefox got caught up in feeling as though they needed to do this. And if you talk to the regulators, they say, yes, of course they need to do it. Is you have a lot of pressure right now, as these laws have gone into effect, to be really transparent about what you're doing and formal about what you're doing, which is the other piece of this. In the formality, these laws are not made for a Firefox, or especially not for a Thunderbird.
Yeah.
They're made for, and I think about it in terms of a Microsoft Outlook, which is doing shady stuff with your data.
Yeah.
And so the language they want you to use and the things that they want you to outline, you have to touch on, but it's not always applicable in a way that it's hard to describe this stuff in a way that both fulfills what the regulators and the law want to see versus what you're trying to communicate to your users. And so what we're seeing with the corporation is them trying to walk that line and learning live in front of the whole world how to walk that line in a way that both gives the regulators what they want to see and the users reassurance that they're not doing anything shady. And frankly, I do think that the first draft, what they shared out with folks, which they shared before they actually rolled it out to users, and they expected to get some good feedback. So they did. Now, it raised a bunch of people's alarms, and that's unfortunate. But we needed that in order to understand, what expectations were. At least we're very happy as Thunderbird to have that, because now we can craft anything we have to ultimately produce,
Yeah.
thinking about what the reaction was here.
Yeah, you have a perfect blueprint of how not to communicate about your own terms of use when you actually do need to implement some.
Mhm. But I wanna say, I caught up with some of the folks who crafted this, and they're open source enthusiasts their whole lives, and they just happen to be lawyers who are, and they're talking about, you know, the stuff that they were surprised by. And I thought it was really interesting because the non-exclusive royalty-free worldwide license sounded scary to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And it even sounded scary to me on first read. But then going through each word, it's like, okay, it means literally we don't have exclusive rights to your
Yeah.
data, not exclusive. They have users across the world, so they put it worldwide because users are everywhere. All their users are everywhere. And uh the royalty free is they didn't pay a royalty for the user's data, but it sounds terrible.
Yeah, and
Legal language like that sounds
yeah,
terrible.
it's the difficulty with those things. Like I worked for a bunch of startups and a bunch of bigger companies, like 6,000, 7,000 employees in France specifically. But every time we had to craft those legal mentions, what we call mention légale in French, so legal mentions, basically the legal boilerplate of what the website is allowed to collect, not collect. When we had to implement everything related to the GDPR as well, we worked with lawyers, and what they gave us was extremely difficult to understand, but also extremely scary for anyone who actually read those terms. And I totally understand that this is a hard thing to present, but I also feel like Mozilla did an absolutely terrible job of presenting and communicating these terms because they knew what the reason was for implementing those. Those were various regulations. It was no secret.
Yeah.
There was no really good reason
Yeah.
to keep that as a secret, so they should probably have led with that. And very likely there should have been multiple passes of communication ahead of time. And there's still the issue that now that those terms are here, they do still grant a license to Mozilla for collecting some data. They can modify those terms in the background without notifying users, and they can use whatever is laid out in the privacy policy, which they can also modify in the background without notification, to collect more stuff. And I think this is still not a really solved problem. It's either you trust Mozilla to never do it, or you don't trust them to never do it because you basically gave them the keys to your data in the future. And I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people in my community, in the Thunderbird, in the Firefox community, if any inkling of those terms changing is even sniffed in the air, people will just freak out. But a lot of Mozilla users or Firefox users are probably not as tech savvy, and they probably might not know about those
Yeah.
changes. So it's still sort of a worrying foot in the door, and this hasn't really been addressed by Mozilla
I
currently.
think I think I told you this, in an off the record conversation. I think that the problem is, and what we're going to have to solve, and this is one of my key things that I'm going to be advocating for within Mozilla, is how do we set up some kind of process, and that sounds maybe a little too formal, where we're having this conversation with the folks in our community who care a lot about this. Because ultimately the what we were trying to accomplish, what the corporation was trying to accomplish, and I say we because, I do feel like a part of the Mozilla community is providing as much. It's like, okay, we have to do this. Let's provide as much transparency as possible. And that truly is where, the folks working on it came from, is like, even if the language sounds scary, we're going to try to be as transparent so that the users know what we're doing. We don't misrepresent what we're trying to do. And the the issues that arose out of it were exactly what you said, which is we should have had folks from the community reviewing it and providing feedback throughout the entire process. That's certainly now, and I said this on one of our mailing lists.
Scary, weird, not weird. That's a good way of handling it instead of saying, hey,
you're not going to. We have to please with this. There aren't many open source projects that are truly open source in both spirit and in or like us. And so at this scale, this way, other open source projects, if they get big, the fine people we definitely need to be a part of our community and be providing feedback on what we do, get scared off because that's ultimately not what we need. If Mozilla is going to accomplish the things that I know that you want, which is to be a kind of a check on a Google and Apple owned world, at least for the web and browser engines. And there's a lot of other things, don't forget Rust came out of Mozilla and quite a few other kind of key pieces of open source technology came out of Mozilla, and that spirit and that soul is still there. And it's more of a learning how to exist in a world that's dominated by an entirely different species of cat, which are the mega tech corps who, don't give a crap about this. They're not going to apologize for their terms of service.
No, and they don't have to because their community generally doesn't really care. They're okay with trading
and
their
our
data
community
with the service.
Doesn't call them out.
Yeah.
We both know there are a lot of Linux users. There's a lot of open source enthusiasts who are using Chrome.
Yeah.
And they're worried about
even
that.
I, as a Linux and open source enthusiast, I make my videos on YouTube, which is definitely not a data and privacy friendly platform either. So obviously, but I think the thing is we hold our, let's say, open source or free software champions to higher standards because on the YouTube side of things, for some people on the Gmail, Google side of things, there is no alternative. For a lot of people, there is no alternative to those platforms. For Firefox is the alternative, and we want it to be better than the ones that we know are data hungry or just privacy infringing all the time. And you said that I wouldn't really like the answer, which is that Firefox and Mozilla has to learn those steps. The main issue I have isn't that those terms are very scary, because, of course, if you look at them word per word, they are not that scary. There's still the underlying thing of they could change them without notifying people, which I don't really like. And I'm not necessarily convinced with the selling data part, but that's just me, and I can overlook that. The main problem is Mozilla has been learning in public with these kind of mistakes for a long while now, and it's getting hard to forgive these sort of mistakes, because they've done a lot of those same blunders. And as someone who has worked in communication and marketing for about 15 years, I now even teach students about communication and marketing. And these are mistakes that not a single one of my interns would have made. Like, they would have known that this is not a good way to communicate this stuff to the specific Firefox community. And that's really what annoys me the most, is that they have had, I think, 10 years to learn these mistakes, to learn from these mistakes. The optics are just horrible. They just announced a new board of directors. They announced a new CEO. They announced that not necessarily a pivot towards AI, but a renewed focus on AI, which we all know depends on a lot of data. And a week after that, they announced new terms of use that are, obviously they've been in the works for longer than a week, but the announcement comes right after. And it seems like they're going to collect some data. So the entire optics has been entirely mismanaged. So can you tell us a bit more about why this keeps happening for at least specifically Firefox, but sometimes it feels like it's the entire Mozilla Foundation?
It's a lot of things all crossing at one moment, in that we have, first off, AI. And the way I see it is, and the thing I was excited about this long before ChatGPT, is these amazing open source models that are out there that do really incredible stuff and can save a lot of time. I think about it in the context of email. We have these old classifiers for sorting emails. You can think about, what Gmail does with the social, the newsletter, and everything. But with the new open source models, you can tell them how you want emails sorted, how what you're interested in seeing bubble to your like priority. That's incredible capability that a person, instead of writing custom filters or something, could just tell a small language model running on their own device, this is what I want to see. This other stuff you can bucket into these places. That's amazing innovation. So AI is one pillar. And what Mark has said, who's the president of Mozilla, is that his concern is that open source AI will not come out victorious. And he feels like that it needs to for our movement. And so that's one pillar, and that's where the AI comes in, is we believe open source AI needs to be the winner out of all of it. And we poured a lot of money into that. Mozilla as a whole has poured a lot of money into promoting that future. Right now, there's a lot going on in the world. And big tech is as powerful as ever, And so when you look at the Mozilla Foundation, that's pillar two, which is how do we make it so that other technology can exist in the world outside of what's created in these large corporations like the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts, and make sure that they're not just by default always in control of everything. And then you have us over here. We have Moco and MZLA, which is creating Thunderbird, which is all about expressing that out into the world. And it's because AI and these regulations coming into effect and everything, it's converging on a moment where we're just trying to keep up. We're trying to address all these things. Now, the problem is who we are, in that, like we talked about earlier, we do this stuff, we communicate about it, we try to make sure this terms of service thing didn't start with terms of service popping up on someone's machine. It started with a blog post. So communicating this stuff and opening up, to use something Mark said, the windows and the doors. The mistake that we've made with each of these is just not opening them up earlier, not opening up sooner, not having more conversations and creating the forums for those conversations. But I think that it's a perfect storm of, there's a lot going on that we're trying to tackle, and we're a group that is transparent about this and open to criticism. People tire of criticizing groups that don't respond to criticism. They don't do anything. We do. Now there's a difference too. I think sometimes we give maybe too much airtime to a criticism. We should say, yeah, that was unfortunate, but there are thousands of people in the Mozilla community, and when one person messes up, like, we fix it, or a group of people mess up. I think about the Mr. Robot, thing. Like, that was not a concerted Mozilla thing. That was a team making a mistake.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we can attribute every blunder. I'll list a few in my own video, saying like I got tired of Firefox specifically and how the communication around it was handled. I listed a few issues dating back to 2017. I think 2017 was the Mr. Robot thing, but there has been others. I'm sure every single one of these can be attributed to a single team just not announcing something, not working properly. And I think the main problem with Mozilla is that it is too big to just be a community project. It is too big. It has too much money involved, too many users probably as well, even though the market share of Firefox is just slowly dropping. It is still a pretty big project in terms of numbers of users, and Mozilla isn't just Firefox as well. So it is too big to just be a community project, but it's also too community focused to be run as a company or a corporation, and it feels like it is being run like a corporation.
Well, yeah, that's the dilemma, right? Like, that's the issue. Is, you said it better than I could have. There's a lot of resources there. there's a lot of things going on, and we have a framework. If you go in to develop Firefox, you go in to develop Thunderbird, is a chimera. It's if you look at Thunderbird's module owners, which are the people who control the different parts of the code base of Thunderbird, they're not all employees. Some of them are just community members who have been active in the project for a long time. And so you're always dealing with this chimera group. And it's how frankly, it's how Mozilla thinks of itself, is the companies are the vehicle for influencing change in the world. They are not the end goal. They're not profit. I know that, I see stuff online about, oh, they're making this move to make money or whatever. I've spoken now to every team inside of Mozilla, to senior leadership. To say that profit is not the motivating a factor is the greatest understatement of all time. They all are there to address the problems that they see around the state of tech.
I think this is an interesting thing, because you say you talk to senior people, senior executives maybe, or at least team leaders inside of Mozilla, and they all say basically that we're not doing this for profit, we're doing this because we want to change the landscape of technology, we want to fight big tech. But every time you read a blog post from Mozilla specifically talking about Firefox, they always mention the fact that they need to be more financially independent, and they always talk about this financial incentive, saying we need to generate more revenue. Every single blog post or refocus talks about this, which I think highlights the disconnect between maybe the people working on the actual projects and the leadership or communication team. I'm not sure if I should lump people together.
No, it's not a disconnect, but you have to think about it from a different frame. The thing that Mozilla is thinking about is well, I'm talking about the corporation right now, because the foundation, for instance, is supported by donors, and so is MZLA Thunderbird. It's 100% supported by donors, and not big donors, all users, all small donors. Firefox is different historically. That's because of a historic thing in that they get money from the Google search contract, the percentage of which, what that represents, has gone down over time, and the goal ultimately is for Firefox to have a variety. We have to find a way to be sustainable. This is what Thunderbird talks about. How are we going to be sustainable in the future and not be dependent on, Thunderbird has figured this out. We're sustainable and we're growing that base, and it grows considerably every year. Amazing. Now we're looking at how do we offer more value to our users. That's where we're at, Firefox is over here. They're also thinking about the same thing. One, how do we offer more value to our users? It's kind of interesting that for the longest time they would sit on features that were really amazing for a really long time, just like we got to get it perfect. And now they're kind of saying like, no, we've got to ship these features such as vertical tabs and stuff like yesterday. Like we've had them, we've been working on them. Let's just get them out the door.
And I honestly love that direction. I mentioned like these updates, the updates to Thunderbird 136 and Firefox 136 in my latest news video. I think it was like Saturday, and I said I'm really happy about those changes. I think the direction the products are going is great.
Yep, and so thank you for that. To circle back, the thing that there's no disconnect, but there's a realization that if the corporation, not we, they don't find ways to be sustainable and not so reliant on a single partner, that's going to provide a better ecosystem and also allow for just more experiments, more products potentially. And so I think that it's fair to say the communication hasn't been great, but I think that I could make a case, and I'd be willing to make a case to anyone, that the heart and soul behind it is what is still good, is very good. And, there are no stock options at the Mozilla Corporation or at MZLA. There are no, there's, you're not a public company. They exist to adhere to the Mozilla Manifesto, and they're owned by a nonprofit. And ultimately, we talk, at least in MZLA, but I know MoCo has to talk about, MoCo is Mozilla Corporation, it's shorthand, has to talk about this. Our board asks us about impact. They care a lot less about profit. Profit only exists to serve the mission and the Mozilla Manifesto. And what our conversations are about are impact. How are you making an impact in the world? How are you ensuring that this good technology that we know needs to exist is coming to fruition? So I know we've gone on a tangent now, but
no, it's really interesting because I think it outlines the fact that the real problem isn't the people, the features, the goal, the board, or maybe not even the executives. It's the way all of these things come together and are communicated to users. I think the root of the issue is, and maybe has been for the past 10 years, how this is being communicated. Because the things that are being done are good, like mostly good. They can be misinterpreted, or at least they can be looked at unfavorably. I did so for some of those things, but the goal inside is to fight big tech, is to have a credible alternative to big tech. Right now, we can't really say that Firefox is having a lot of success fighting, specifically Chrome, Chromium, and all the browsers based on that engine.
Well, it's a mixed bag too there, because, for instance, Thunderbird is up considerably in our user base.
Totally.
And Firefox on mobile platforms also is growing at a pretty rapid pace.
That's interesting.
So, I think people are ready. I think more and more people are ready for an alternative. I know that I've seen a change amongst friends and family where they just say, like, you know what, I don't really want to use
Chrome
yeah, exactly, anymore. And so I see that everywhere, and that's great. And there's one other thing, and I think you said this the other day, but I don't know if you've said it yet today. It's fair to hold Mozilla to a different standard than these other guys. It's completely fair. So I say this to the community members out there. It's fair. I'm not upset about that. You should hold us to a different standard because we're saying we're doing this for the reason of good.
Yeah, and there's also the very unique situation that right now Firefox specifically is the last hope. Like, there's currently at least nothing else. You either use a Chromium-based browser, and so you reinforce Google's monopoly on how the web is rendered. Not everyone cares about this, but people who know what it means tend to care about it. Or you use Firefox or a Firefox fork, but Firefox forks cannot exist without Firefox. So that's probably why people are as upset, or at least as sensitive to any of the changes made to Firefox. It's the last one. It's the last thing we have.
It's a Star Wars thing.
Yeah, exactly.
We thought we're the chosen one.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So obviously people, myself included, will be like maybe more annoyed by every single little change that we don't agree with, because this is our last project that most of us really enjoy. We don't use it because it's the least bad. We tend to use it because we like it. And so anything that breaks that like, or at least diminishes it, is always viewed as very, very problematic.
I think what, these are the conversations I'm having. I think coming out of this, we've got to create a community group for all of Mozilla. around communication and pull them into this is what, terms of service. This is something that we're working on. Do you want to provide feedback on this early on? And I know for Thunderbird, but I do think the rest of Mozilla is going to get in on this, is opening up the doors to these type of conversations in our community forums. In the past, something like this, and this is what we're seeing, something like this is a problem to be solved by a subject matter expert, and then released. But clearly it's holds a lot of significance for a lot of folks. And it makes sense. I am the type of person, just like a lot of audience members, just like a lot of community members, who checks the terms of service of the stuff they use. At least, I do a scan of it, or now
Yeah.
I guess the new way to talk about it is run it through ChatGPT and have it pull out bullet points. But I get that. And I think we're gonna have to adjust to how we operate in this space. And then for past sins, I think that you called out at the end of your video. I think that it's not something you can really even talk about, because I don't know how we'd talk about it in a way that wasn't like a 5 or 6 hour
Yeah, of course.
conversation. But Mozilla is changing for the better, acknowledging where they've fallen short, where we've all fallen short in the context of your video. This is a good moment for us to continually look at what we're trying to be and what our user expectations are and our community's expectations are. But I've seen it internally where there's a ton of conversation around how are we going to address some of the concerns that people have raised? How are we going to show them through both our actions and our words that we're here to do what we say we're here to do?
So there are efforts internally to try and maybe change how things are communicated, maybe communicate them a little bit more, before they are actually delivered to the entire user base.
Yeah. And they're active conversations. What falls under that umbrella? We're really fortunate in the Thunderbird world in that we have a community council with a ton of power. And that community council reviews the budget, the roadmap, a lot of different areas of projects that we work on over in Thunderbird land. So I often get a lot of feedback really early on when something isn't going the direction that they think it should go. And usually that's a big win. It's a big help to be able to, I say it's like seeing around corners. Somebody says, well, that didn't strike me so good. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me why. What did we miss here? But I think that, and I'll quote Mark again, what he said last year at the big Mozilla, it's called Moz Week, when everybody got together. He said, open the doors, open the windows, let everyone in. And I do think that the entire organization is trying to figure out across all Mozilla how you do that. And I think it's easier for some of our groups, it's harder for others, but figuring that out, I think, will ultimately lead us back to a place where we can engender more trust because we're a lot more transparent.
I think that's the way to do it. Well, personally, at least it would satisfy me if I could just have not just a peek behind the curtain, but just rip out the curtain and just look at what actually exists, what is there. Because, like we said, it is a community project that's too big to be run like your generic 10-person distro for Linux, and it's also too rooted in the community to be operated as a corporation. It feels, at least to me, like it's been operated like a corporation would. So we're only telling you stuff once it's ready, once it's done. If you want that peek behind the curtain, you can have it, because you can, of course, contribute to the code base. You can look at the stuff, but there are some discussions that you're not going to be privy to. And so I think opening all of this is good. At least I would think it's suitable.
It's a push and pull too, right? Like tech companies generally, and I understand the reason why, you want, to some extent, you want to be able to put things out in a state where it's ready.
Yeah.
Even my own developers, they kind of like tense up when it's time to put something out where that is not yet ready.
Yeah, well, I think
yet.
everyone who's worked in either software development or, like I did, product management and project management, every time you're ready to press the push to prod button, you're always
But I'm talking
cringing a bit.
Yes, 100%. But I'm talking about in our specific type of organizations, we actually expect to put out stuff before we've even really 100% gotten to a point where we're comfortable with it. You know, this is what, even if you talk about myself with the community council that we have, I clue them into everything, but sometimes I'm nervous because I'm like, I haven't really decided what I think about this yet. And so I don't really want to open it up yet because I don't even know what I believe. And I don't want you to criticize the work before I understand what I believe about it. And that happens all the time in open source software, if you're doing it the right way, if you're not just throwing it over the wall. And so there's a push and pull here, right? And it's constant. And especially in folks, you know, we exist in a world where even Thunderbird has this. We hire folks who have worked in other software agencies, and then we have to like indoctrinate them into how we do things. And that's a process too, because they're like, I really want to, to have a bunch of, randos from the internet commenting on what I'm doing. It's not done yet. It's not ready yet. But that's our challenge. And that's something that we have to continually work on and strive towards. And so, yeah,
it's just the open source or free software process. You have to show things even before you're confident in their quality, even before you've actually constructed the entire skeleton of what you want to do. And I can totally understand. I would not imagine myself like putting out the first, the A-roll and the B-roll of a video, just publishing it to YouTube and saying, hey, these are the building blocks for my future video. What do you think about those? Well, it's crap. It's not color graded. It's not edited. There are many, many mistakes in it. This would be very hard for me to accept, obviously.
I have a perfect example. When years before we actually rolled out Thunderbird Supernova with the new design elements, we laid out very early designs. And I remember my team being so ready to do that. They were like, we're gonna show what the future could look like. And they're smiling, they're ready to do that. They put it out on the internet and they got some good feedback, but they got a lot of bad feedback too. And they're like, didn't we say in the post that it's like we're just playing with ideas? And they're like,
we want the feedback
Thunderbird right now. If this is the direction you're going, I hate it. I hate you, and it's like, and that's the hard part about being out in the open. That I understand why groups end up, waiting to share the work because they're afraid of getting criticized before the work is done.
Well, especially when you're working on something very visual, something that has a user experience, an interface. It's not like you're building the next version of a super obscure framework or library where there is no visual element. People who know better will criticize you about, I don't know, the feature, how you implemented it, the API you're offering, but it's more technical, and so the discussion is more on how can I use your thing. It's not on, I hate the look. I don't like the graphical thing that you've built. I don't want to use that. I want my habits to stay the same. It's not the same perception, I think. And so, it can be very difficult to put that work out there, which all goes back to how do you communicate that this is a first draft, a very early version, And how do you actually publish this first draft instead of just publishing the final release and saying, this is what's happening?
Yep. And I think this is a challenge that we'll wrap our head around. I know that in your video, you brought up 10 years of missteps. There's definitely truth there. Before I was around in the Mozillaverse, there were some disappointing moments there too for me too. But I do think that I'm encouraged because I see every day that more and more of the right people are in the room who have the right goals and values, especially with this community, especially aligned with the open source community, who are advocating for doing things in a way that is in line with what we say that our values are. And ultimately, I believe that open source software has to win.
Yeah.
And we've seen it win in a number of areas that even what I'm kind of getting older. When I started my career, did not look like a possibility. I worked in a data center, and I remember saying, hey, we're going to convert all of these machines to Linux, and we're going to run the Apache web server on it instead of IIS. And I was laughed out of the room. That will never happen. That's the dumbest idea we've ever heard. And, that has changed, now I know, like, how many IIS servers are there?
Yeah, no one would even question what you suggested specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've seen that, GitHub and GitLab and all the projects that exist there and that are active and growing, it's just amazing. And I think that when it comes to Firefox and browsing the web, I think that as much as folks, might be declaring the death of Firefox, and Thunderbird died a long time ago.
Yeah, well,
according to
it was
everyone.
Well resurrected.
Yeah.
This honestly was something that really surprised me at the time, because I used to use Thunderbird way back when I was using, I think, Windows XP or something, before I even discovered Linux. And then it slowly petered out, and seeing it revived with actually millions in funding from users was a shock moment for me. I was like, yeah, that can happen. Okay. Well, and it also gave me confidence that other projects that, like, for example, Firefox, who seem like they're on a downward trend, can maybe also pick things back up.
Yeah. And I think that it will. I have to be optimistic, but I think that it will, only because the way that the world changed, and frankly, the way that these big tech companies have been able to really put their thumbs on the scale to benefit themselves and their market share, especially when it comes to browsers, but also email. It put a lot of real pressure on a player like Firefox or a player like Thunderbird. It's really telling that even still today, there's like a little, in Windows, there's like a little news feed thing on the bottom left-hand corner. If you click it and you open up an article from there, or an email address from there,
Microsoft Edge.
It's Microsoft Edge and Outlook.
Yeah.
It will ignore your defaults.
No matter your defaults, yeah. And I still do not understand how this is legal. At the very least in the EU, I do not understand how this is still allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I actually talked to some folks the other day about that, who are regulators in the EU, and said, I don't understand how this is okay. But I do think, and this is, I guess, where we can leave it, because this is my hopeful message. I do think the tide is turning, at least in how people, even outside a broader group than our open source, folks and our techie folks, are really taking notice of this and tuning into this and saying, do I really want these tech companies to be as powerful as they are and have complete dominance and make all my decisions about how it is that I use tech? And to turn your back on Mozilla at this point, even with our flaws, would be a really sad state of affairs, because we do have as you said, resources to make a dent in this world. We have this, despite the issues, we have a lot of reach. And frankly, this is, and I said this when we were talking off the record, but I'll tell it to everybody. This is the time that we need you most. Help us stop, making these miscommunications. Come in. There's still all the open source communities that existed before are still there. Firefox is still developed by an open source community. You can get really exposed to this stuff just by being around. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to commit code. It even helps when folks are sitting in our matrix rooms, or in Thunderbird's land, sitting in our matrix rooms or on our mailing list and calling out things that you see, because that's open source's superpower. That's the superpower of these projects. It's not to be able to go and raise billions and millions of dollars in venture capital. It's to have a bunch of people who are passionate about this stuff around the world come and join us and help us. And so that's my impassioned plea for folks not to leave the Mozilla ecosystem, but to come. You can always email me. You can always reach out to me, whether it's on our Matrix channels, whether there's plenty of, I don't know if I'm going to share my email address right now, but
probably not. But if you need it, you can find it in the right channels, looking at the Thunderbird community.
Exactly. And I would encourage you to do that.
Well, I'll say that for me personally, the talks we had, like, first for preparing this interview, so before you actually went and checked to get that information, because full transparency, we talked like for half an hour. It was at the end of last week. And you said to me, like, you didn't want to record this interview right now because you wanted to have all the actual facts and talking to people at Mozilla, which you did. And so now we're recording this. And so from this off-the-record talk and this talk today, I do have some hope. Like I said, I like personally the direction the products are going towards. I like Firefox, the new features, the speed they're adding them now, and the progression I'm seeing. I like it. I like Thunderbird. Thunderbird was never really in question specifically. I still have my doubts. I need to see Mozilla being run more openly. I need to see these doors and windows being opened. I need to have that transparency, that maybe owning up to the various communication mistakes, so I can regain my trust in specifically how Firefox is run. And then maybe, yeah, I'll go back to using Firefox. Right now, I'm still using a fork, it's using Firefox somewhat, but it's not like the specific product. But I would love to keep using Firefox. Like I told you when off the record last week, I like those tools. They're my tools. I customize them. I like how they're set up. I don't want to change. I don't want to move my profiles to another one, to a fork, losing out on some feature or some specific DRM stuff to play back videos. I don't want to. I'm comfortable. I like those. And for me to move out of specifically Firefox is a pain and an imposition, and I would prefer not having to do so. And so if Mozilla can open up relatively fast and show all of that transparent stuff, all the efforts that you say are going on at Mozilla from people trying to change all of this, then I guess this would, let's say, mollify me on the issue.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm still not utterly convinced. I need to see that change happening.
Yep. Better than just to assuage you, what I'm going to advocate for, and I know that it's shared amongst leadership, is we don't want to just make our users say, okay, yeah, that's okay with me. We want to turn that into enthusiasm. We want folks to say, hell yeah, I'm using Firefox, like I'm using Thunderbird. That's makes me feel really good. And so we're going to go a step above that, because frankly, that's what the world needs. Mozilla right now the truest form of Mozilla, and we're just going to have to meet that moment, and we're going to work really hard to do that. So my goal is in 12 months, Nick won't just say, yeah, I use Firefox, but
I went
hell
back
yeah, I use
begrudgingly.
Firefox.
No, that's not it. I went back with enthusiasm. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. So
Well,
we're gonna work.
I'm all for it. I'm ready for it. 12 months, 6 months, whatever. I would love to. Sure.
Yep. Yep. Sounds good.
Well, I think that covers everything everything I had in mind. All my questions are addressed. Do you have anything you want to add specifically?
Well, this is just a plug for Thunderbird. If you liked what I said and you want to check out Thunderbird, we actually just changed to monthly releases instead of our ESR. So if you go and download from the website today, you'll get a monthly release of Thunderbird that's updated monthly. So you get the features, as soon as they're done, pretty much. Additionally, if you're on Linux, our favorite operating system, we're working with maintainers and working on getting FlatHub and our snaps moved, or at least have a channel for the monthly release. So we keep moving forward, and our goal is to make it so no one in your family, you don't have to, and no one in your family has to open Outlook again. So
that's a wonderful world.
yeah, it is. It is. Cool. But that's what we've got going on.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for everything you brought to the conversation, for clarifying all of this, and for the super interesting conversation. I'm sure people will reach out in the comments. And obviously, if you want to talk specifically to Ryan, you can, find his email address or find the community channels that you can use for Thunderbird and ask all the questions. Like he said, the doors are opening up, and they were already open for all of that sort of conversation. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for reaching out and offering this talk. And thank you for the work you did collecting all of this information as well, and getting the temperature of the room in various teams at Mozilla. I guess we can always do that again anytime you have something you want to tell to the community, to say to the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The next one. Bye. So, right after I published my recent video on the Firefox terms of use and my opinion and stance on this latest blunder for Mozilla, I was contacted by Ryan Sipes, working for Thunderbird at the MZLA subsidiary of Mozilla. He wanted to talk this through and explain a few more things, so he took the weekend to gather a bunch of information from inside Mozilla, and we had a talk that we recorded yesterday, which I'm going to present to you right now after this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton VPN. You probably already know about Proton Mail, one of the most secure and private email services out there, but they also have their VPN service, which is equally as secure and private. It's also based in Switzerland, and it doesn't log any activity, and it doesn't share any data with third parties. Of course, it is fully encrypted, so you can use it from any public Wi-Fi or at home to either change your location or just stay anonymous online. On top of that, Proton VPN uses a 10 gigs per second network plus a suite of VPN accelerators, so even when you're using it, your browsing stays really fast. Proton VPN supports all your devices, PC or mobile, and they can even run on routers. And they've just completely rebuilt their Linux desktop client for it as well, complete with advanced features like a DNS filter to block ads and trackers, a kill switch to stop your internet connection if the VPN connection drops, so your IP is never exposed.
It's Friday, the 7th of March, 2025.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Kirkland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News in a blowy Brisbane.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of True Fans in a very misty, cold, wet England.
We really made this whole thing about first-party data, understanding what people are doing. You can really see what's working. That's Adam Curry. He's talking with Dave Jones about Godcaster. Plus, how powerful are live podcasts? What does Apple Verified actually mean? What's happening with Wondery and YouTube? 1 billion listeners? Really? This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout with the tools, support and community to ensure you keep podcasting. Start podcasting, keep podcasting with Buzzsprout.com.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
Now, Adam Curry, the co-inventor of podcasting, and Dave Jones, a key innovator behind Podcasting 2.0, have a new project called the Godcaster, godcaster.fm if you want to go there. It's a new podcasting platform with a simple mission to empower local broadcasters, churches and ministries to reach wider audiences through innovative podcasting and monetization tools. Have you been to Godcaster yet, James?
I have been to Godcaster. I think it's a very interesting solution to a particular problem in that part of the media. You started by asking Adam Curry, what is the Godcaster? And why did he want to bring it out?
The Godcaster came about over a year ago. Someone who had seen me speak at the Spark Media Conference in Houston came to me and he said, I've got this thing. It's not an app. It's a service. It's for radio stations. I hear all these cool things about the podcast index. Can you tell me about it? So I chatted with him, and then he came back again. He had some more questions. And by the third or fourth time, his name is Gordon Marcy. By the third or fourth time, I had started to put together what was going on, and he's been in the radio business all of his life at big networks like Salem, and these are all faith-based broadcast organizations and stations. The solution he had was a podcast player for radio stations, and as I was talking with him more and more, I learned that there's a real conundrum with radio. Not like we didn't know it. Local programming has gone away. Most of this is nationally syndicated content, which also is available on the podcast. The stations are literally sending their audience away to places where they can get podcasts. This is an interesting part of faith-based radio in the United States. It's pretty much value for value. The stations ask for support, and between the stations and the content programming, there's been this issue for 40 years of how do I know that someone was listening to your program on my radio station, gave you a donation, but I don't know about it, and so we're supposed to share revenue. In some cases, the big content providers will buy the airtime. Again, they need to know where did it come from, and it's been this big problem that's been discussed even at the National Religious Broadcasters Conference where I was last week, where 5,000 people show up. It's been this issue where they just can't figure out what they call attribution. This can all be easily solved with a lot of these 2.0 features that we've developed over time. The oh wow moment of all these broadcasters who said, wait a minute, now the station knows that someone hit donate and we know it as well? Why, yes. Oh, you've solved a 40-year-old problem. Seems simple to us. Sometimes you just need some fresh thinking. We really made this whole thing about first-party data, understanding what people are doing in the player, whether it's in a podcast app or whether it's their own app. You can really see what's working. And this is another thing. Well, in podcasting in general, we've never really had that. As of yesterday, we now have, I want to say, 249 stations who are using Godcaster. Any radio station could use it, obviously. But for Dave and I, it has the added advantage of we're doing this for Jesus. So we're super happy about it.
Okay, Dave, hello, how are you?
I'm good, Sam.
Now, Adam Curry, you've known for how long?
Oh, gosh. 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Adam's come to you on several occasions to say, hey, I've got a great idea for a business. How about you do it with me? The last one being the podcast index, obviously. So what did you think when he said, I've got this great idea for Godcaster? And what did you think? Yeah, let's do it all. Oh, my God, not again.
There's always an equal amount of both involved in every one of those. But my standard answer to Adam whenever he says, hey, let's do so-and-so is yes, and then we'll figure it out later. We'll figure out actually how to do it later. So I always answer yes first and then figure out later if it's actually possible. You know, so yeah, the same thing here.
I love it. That Jim Carrey film, Yes Man, where he says yes to everything. That's it, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's take a little step back. How long is it taking you to build this platform, and where did you start? I mean, you've got a blank piece of paper, you're looking at it, and you're going, how do I build this thing? So what did you do?
We sort of took over an existing product with Gordon's product that was called Glory Stone, and so I determined early on that I was just going to rebuild that thing from scratch. It was an older platform. I mean, it still worked well. It was an older platform that had been sort of upgraded over the years to have sort of more modern features. But the core of it was still sort of an old LAMP-based application, PHP MySQL, that was just showing its age. So I just determined to build from scratch and initially replicate, you know, all the features that we thought that the current customers couldn't live without, and then at the same time sort of weave in the newer stuff that we knew we were going to be needing to bring the product up to what we wanted it to be. So it took, I mean, it was rapid. Lots of, you know, late night, early morning coding sessions to get this thing up and running in about 5 months. So it went from 0 to, you know, launched in 5 months to be ready for discussion about it and selling at NRB for people who would want it. So that was the time frame. You know, we pretty much hit everything we wanted to achieve by then. The way me and Adam have always worked has kind of been that way. We just go as fast as possible, and then trying to hit a target, and then at the end we kind of sit back and say, okay, where are we at? Let's go clean up the mess. Let's go, you know, polish things up here and this kind of thing. So we're kind of used to working that way.
We were building it, you know, building the airplane in flight, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, because we had customers, there were existing customers who had migrated over, and it would literally be the customer would say, hey, you know, my window popped out here. I'm about to get sucked out of the airplane. And we go, Dave, we're losing passengers, man. So it is the way we've worked. It's nothing more fantastic than working with live customers. There's also nothing more scary with working with live customers. And I just want to say, as you said, I've worked with Dave on many projects. Some things have just been for us. Some things have Podcast Index, which is the most successful. But of course, we have zero income from it, which was never the intent. The things that Dave builds are rock solid. The systems stay up, and he's never really done a user interface. He's done user experience, UX, but really a beautiful UI is something he's never done. And man, he knocked it out of the park. It really is a beautiful, beautiful product.
Thanks.
Congratulations to you both. So what is the platform? Because it's not what I would have thought you would have gone for originally, which would be a native iOS app. That's what we're all told to do. So why did you make the decision to go and build what Adam's nicely called a universal web app rather than a progressive app?
Like with everything that we do, it's a little hard to explain. This really isn't a podcast app. This is something really different than that. The thing about the linear to digital transformation for radio is that if all you do is just transfer that broadcast linear audience to a website player, you've really done nothing. The problem with Glory Stone, the old player, was that it was purely just a website player. And it was no different than a podcast app, but you just had to go to this radio station's website to do it. So that's just as restrictive as broadcast, maybe even more so. What we did was we said, okay, you're going to have a web player because that's helpful to the customer. People, their audience wants that. We're going to build a web player that's installable on any radio station's website, and they can plug in all the different content, all the different podcasts that they play on air. They'll plug that in to make what's essentially an on-demand guide in a player on their website. But every player they build also spawns an RSS feed that has all of those shows in it. And that RSS feed is branded to the station. So the station gets their own RSS feed that will hold all of the podcast content and gets essentially redistributed back out to the Podcast Index and other directories, so that now KHCB's customers or listeners can subscribe not to just focus on the family, they can subscribe to KHCB itself. And by doing that, they're going to get Focus on the Family and all of KHCB's other national content and KCB's local content, they're going to get all of this stuff in a single feed that they can then subscribe to in a normal podcast app. Something like True Fans, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Podverse, Podcast Guru, all the 2.0 apps. It's a standard podcast feed with 2.0 namespace enhancements in it. That's the thing that we took to it is yes, our player, we're proud of it and we're glad that it works well, but we're just as happy for people to not even use our player at all, but instead to subscribe to these radio stations' podcast feeds in their own podcast app. Now you're allowing your listener, as a station, you're allowing your listener to listen to you, including your live broadcast, because we use the live item tag. Now they can listen to you in their own most convenient, preferable way, which is the podcast app. It really doesn't matter who's listening to your content and where. We want to accommodate all of that and then give them some stats that will show them what's happening. We support the live tag, we support funding, support the value tag, chapters. We pass all that stuff through and then we add some of it as well for like location tag. We also support PodPing, of course, for live broadcasts and all that kind of thing. A lot of that stuff is interdependent, and we built that out. But then we also have this other huge list of things we have to support, and that's going to be what comes next. So we have, we're going to be supporting sound bites and transcripts, publisher feeds, all the value time splits. Just pretty much all of this stuff is on the to-do list, and the publisher feed is great because what we're allowing, and through various partnerships, we're going to be able to allow the radio stations to make it easier to push their own content out through the traditional podcast hosting platforms that we always have had good relationships with, Buzzsprout, RSS.com, Blueberry, all these guys, and then even in the newer 2.0 focused hosts as well. So we're going to leverage all those relationships we've built over the last nearly 5 years to help the radio stations build up their own content catalog. And then we'll be able to put all that stuff into a publisher feed like you're talking about. Then the radio station has their own master feed that that shows their brand, everything, and then underneath that, all of their content. So yeah, I think you're just sort of anticipating where we're headed as well.
So with all of this now out in the open and you've got a clear pathway forward, just very quickly, you've got this other project, Podcast Index 2.0. Where do you see that taking shape in 2025? What's going on in your heads that you think, we're healthy, this is happening? What are your thoughts on it currently?
I would say that I think we're in a good place. The Podcast Index and the namespace, they've hit a point where people are comfortable with the technology, I think, now. And so, we just had a big discussion this week about the images tag and about how to re-engineer that thing to be good. And so now we're looking at, I'm processing things mentally as how do we need to sort of shape the way we do tags and the way we do namespace work going forward to sort of fit this new model. In the beginning, it was nobody knew what we were doing. Nobody understood any of this stuff. We're having to deal with pent up demand for new features for for 15 years worth of content. So we were just going to, go typical fashion, just go as fast as we can. That really has changed. And so now things are at a slower pace. And I think, going forward, I think we're probably going to focus on just one or two things with each phase of the podcast namespace. Because there's still dozens of apps out there that don't even support a single tag. Even though there's 600,000 feeds out there that support the podcasting 2.0 namespace. There's maybe more than that. I haven't counted in a while. There's so much content that has the podcasting 2.0 namespace tags in it. But many podcast apps just still don't even support number one, the very first one. Something easy like transcripts. So I think there's no need to just rush anymore. But at the same time, I think it's good because now we can just slow down, have our focus on one thing, and then with the namespace. And then on the index side, I think we're shifting focus to decentralizing because we don't want to just become another Apple with a directory that everybody's dependent on, even though we're, it's open. So we want to decentralize that as we can. I think we're getting to the point in the index and the namespace where we're a mature technology, and now our focus gets to shift to sort of mature, more important things.
So what Dave said about decentralizing the index, we have kind of said from the get-go, the podcast index, our job is to eliminate ourselves. And that means there's, whether it's distributed hash space or however we wind up doing it, and there's some amazing things being done. I would love to see PodPing integrated more. I did a presentation at NRB in the ballroom, and I showed the tiles.podping.org, and people just, their minds were boggling, like, wait a minute, this exists? How does that happen? How do I get my podcast updating that way? And with Godcaster itself, I hope that we can show a path for developers. You're doing this with TrueFans, is to show that you don't have to just create another podcast app. You can create an experience or an interface or a service for a group of people who want to use podcast technology, and specifically podcasting 2.0, since there's such a rich environment. So this, I think, is where we can have great success instead of, as I lovingly call the podcast industrial complex, focusing on what share does this app have. Well, that's going to remain kind of the same for a long, long time. But meanwhile, as we've proven with value for value in general, you can make a living, you can make your product successful with a smaller demographic in this highly connected world. So certainly on the Podcasting 2.0 podcast, which is where the name came from, although it became kind of its own beast, is to show more of that. And as more of these experiences are developed, I think you'll see the rest of the industry come along with that.
Adam Curry, Dave Jones, I could talk to you for hours on this, but thank you very much. Now, where would anyone go, Adam, for getting more information about the app itself?
Well, the service godcaster.fm, and really appreciate the work that you do, Sam, and that James does. Power, as we call it, Power, is is certainly one of my weekly listens. I wish we would have coordinated better for this interview, and we all would have had a glass of red wine to go with it, because we know that that's usually how you're listening to our show.
Absolutely. The only way. And Dave, for anyone wanting to help get involved with it, maybe give you some, get involved with the API, where would they go for any of that stuff?
Just reach out to me, and we can help them out on that. And the thing about Godcaster is under the hood, sort of double under the hood, it's all podcast index. So anybody who is already familiar with the index and the way that works can help here too. So we're sort of eating our own dog food in that way.
And on behalf of the community, just for me, I'd like to say thank you to you both publicly for all the work you've done for the podcast index. It's massively appreciated.
Thanks,
you may not hear it all the time, but just know that we do appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Adam Curry, the co-inventor of podcasting, and Dave Jones. There is a much longer version of that interview that you will hear in this very feed on Monday. Sam, what did you think of that?
Well, it's great that they've built on Podcasting 2.0 and the podcast index. So they've built a application platform for themselves. I mean, Adam's track record in radio gives them an insight into some of the problems that radio stations are now facing, with audiences moving away from AM, FM to streaming, and how those platforms are not getting, I guess, the details that they need to give advertisers the certainty that people are listening to the radio station. So adding things like the funding tag, adding things like management tools, I guess it gives those radio stations things that we in the Podcasting 2.0 community have already been using, but now it's coming to the radio stations themselves.
Yeah, no, it's all of that certainly sounded very interesting. There are new figures that have come out of US radio this week, and interestingly, everything's up. Most age groups are up 16% in terms of time spent listening, and radio listening itself in terms of people is up by 3%. That's amazing news. Do you know how they've managed to end up doing that, Sam?
No, no, because I don't know how to get the reports that everything's up as well, but there you go.
Well, exactly. So what they've done is, until this year, a radio listener used to be somebody who would listen to 5 minutes of a radio station or more. This year, it's 3 minutes to a radio station or more. So surprise, surprise, everything has gone up. Yes, it's a very different world. And I think listening to the Podcasting 2.0 show last week, what's very clear from Adam talking excitedly about talking at a conference is that everybody was super thrilled and super excited about everything that Adam was talking about. Because they are coming at this from a completely different world, and we think that we have solved this and this is old news and everything else, but my goodness, not to many of the people that he was talking to. He's brilliant when talking at a conference. I wish he would do it more, but super good. So that was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the time when that report then says 30 seconds, so maybe they'll get to 1 billion listeners. That'll be the way to do it. 30-second listens on radio. We have 1 billion listeners. We'll talk about that more later. But the one thing that Adam and Dave did talk about is the lit tag, the live item tag. And I did ask them about whether they would be a provider of services such as HLS or Shoutcast. And the answer was very clearly no, which means that the onus is now back onto podcasting hosts to provide that. And I'm sad to say that I'm not seeing any traction there. RSS.com were very keen to do it, and they got 95% of the way with all of the fields for it, but not the last bit, which is the server, right?
Yes, no, exactly. But there again, the server needn't necessarily be run by a podcast host. It'd be easier if it was. I think what we need to do, and I certainly learned this when I was working on a piece of technology, and it was interesting. Again, listening to the Podcasting 2.0 show last week, there was one point where Adam starts talking about listening to a radio station over the air and driving away from the transmitter. And he was saying, cars these days, if the signal goes too bad, it'll say, would you like to continue listening to this station online? And Adam was very excited by that. You know what? That was my technology. That was the technology. That was the technology that I was a co-founder of 15, 20 or so years ago. So wonderful to hear Adam talking about that too. Hooray!
Well done, you.
But I think that what I learnt with that technology is that's actually relatively easy and straightforward to do. It needs a file putting on your web server, and it needs one additional entry in your DNS, and it's as simple as that. And we thought, a man called Nick and I, who came up with the original specification with help from many others, we thought, well, that is so easy, every radio station will be able to do it. The quick answer is no. I mean, even talking about your DNS server and adding a text field to your DNS server, or adding one, XML document to your website, that was beyond the knowledge of a lot of these radio broadcasters. So I think, with all of this, it's very easy to come up with, here's the lit tag and this is what you have to do. And, even getting a podcast host to support it. But at the end of the day, it's still hugely, hugely complicated to most people out there. And so it needs to be as easy as possible. And the American way is to just hire that in. And so if you've convinced yourself that there's a business in there, you just hire somebody in to come and fix all of that for you. You never even learn how any of that stuff works. I happen to believe that that's the wrong way of doing it, but nevertheless, that's the American broadcast radio standard way of doing it.
I think it needs to be a radio live service in a box, right?
Yeah.
I think people need to have it as simple as that.
Well, maybe we should be talking to the likes of Radio.co, which is a company based in this week, also achieving version 2.2, are Omni Studio, Triton, Voxnest, and Spreaker. So that's actually pretty good news, because that means that pretty well all of the people that were visibly dragging their feet have now achieved the recertification, which is
wallet, who then gets given tokens, these jam tokens. How do they get the jam tokens? What's the mechanism for purchasing them? And then how do they actually give them? Because if it's a token, then it's not actually a physical 1 cent or 1p stream. It's a token of value? Is that token now worth 1p? All of these are questions that if I could interview the CEO, Andrew Antar, I would be asking, because I don't think it's very clear from the website what is the way that they actually enable all of this. They talk about the things that we talk about in Podcasting 2.0, but they actually don't.
So I looked at it and I thought, well, it's not a Pod News thing, but I thought that you might find that interesting, given true fans and everything else. And so yes,
I've reached out to them.
That makes a bunch of sense. And yes, and they haven't really said anything, have they? They haven't come back to us as yet. Now we're recording this slightly earlier than normal this week for reasons you'll find out in James and Sam's week. Yeah, so I don't know. It just says all the way through this, artists receive instant royalty payments for every second their music is streamed. Well, every second in this particular deck that I'm in this particular deck that I'm looking at, not every minute. But but as you say, it's not very clear where that money is actually coming from. You do, though, get demographic information about your listeners, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Also built in to the app is direct messaging. Not quite sure how that works. And I do notice in one of their decks, they do have a screenshot of the app and it says wallet on the top of the screen. So there is a wallet going on there. There is something called a jam price and a rate per minute. And all this kind of nonsense. I mean, again, why they have to make it so complicated? It was complicated enough with Sats. and now it's all about jam. Yes, but really interesting. And I wish that it would be good to talk to these people and learn a little bit more. I should say that they have got $20 million in funding.
Wow.
They've clearly got some cash there.
I can now see who's paying.
Yes. Well, yes, exactly. So, and they've got some nice coverage in things like Rolling Stone and TechCrunch and Fast Company. So, who knows? But anyway, that's certainly one to look at because, why shouldn't they be talking about podcasting as well in there?
Now, moving on, James, there's a couple of stories about Wondery I've been wondering about, and I thought we'd have a little chat about. Yay, yes. Amazon's Wondery has said that there are a number of small job layoffs in the company, and we talked last week about how they've closed operations in Brazil and Mexico.
Yes.
So what's going on with Wondery, James? Are they in trouble?
I don't think they are in trouble. I think that they are doing what any good company does and looking every so often at the cost base and going, oh, we're actually making money out of that. Right, well, let's stop doing that then. They have cut what the company calls a small number of jobs. Someone talking to Reuters who had this particular story said that the number of affected people was dozens and dozens. Amazon says, no, it wasn't. I would suspect that for Amazon, it is a small number of jobs, but for human beings, it's quite a large number of jobs. So I suspect that's how that works, because Amazon is so large. I think it's telling that both content and advertising teams have been affected as well. So yes, not quite sure, but certainly having a look at the wider picture, there have been quite a lot of right sizing. I believe might be the phrase there, in terms of how Amazon's staffing actually works. The new boss there, who is called Andy Jassy, the CEO. Yeah, I'm sure I'm sure he stays in your village. Andy has apparently already slashed tens of thousands of corporate jobs at Amazon, and he's reorganizing business units in order to reduce the ratio of managers to individual contributors. And of course, shares closed up. So I don't think it's anything that we should particularly worry about. I think it's really more just keeping an eye on. It was an interesting Monday because I was covering news about what was going on at Amazon,
but also news that was going on at WNYC, who've lost jobs. I think Monk Studios in Berlin has lost a managing director, and it basically looks as if that company is all but closed, and so on and so forth. It did look a pretty miserable Monday. So hence why the only positive story ended up making the main headline, because I don't really like negative stories. So I thought that was interesting, but I don't think there's anything to worry about.
I think they're all suffering a case of the Elons. Let's just cut and see what happens next.
Yes, great.
I think they're all in that mode where they think, well, look, I talked to my wife who's on a number of PLC boards, and they're all doing the same thing, right? Not in the digital space, and they all think, yes, DEI gone.
Yes, closing
job cuts
DEI.
gone.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, AI will replace that horrible cost of humans with automation. Let's all go that way. And that's all you ever hear them talk about nowadays. So I can expect that as well. Now, look, talking of Amazon and Amazon Web Services, and Andy Jassy, who used to work there, was the head of it before he took over from Mr. Bezos. You asked the question, is hosting a podcast on Amazon Web Services a good idea? What was the answer, James?
Yes, I did, given that I've been doing it for the last 5 years. And what was interesting is going back and essentially I was updating a post which I had made way back in 2019 to basically go, okay, what does it look like now? The interesting thing about Amazon is that they have a free tier, and they have recently changed the free tier, which is why I updated it, because somebody asked me. And their free tier is pretty generous now in terms of CloudFront, so serving files. It's a pretty generous free tier, and it does mean that if you were to look at the Pod News Daily, which I host on my own server, then normally, let's ignore what's currently going on, but normally that would be about a price of about $42 a month to host the Pod News podcast, which then, because Amazon has a big free tier, essentially means that it would be free. So yay, in terms of that, except of course the Pod News daily podcast is only 6 minutes long. And if you were to turn that into a 1 hour show, then it would cost $513 to serve. So the quick answer is yes, it's good for us, but no, it's not good for most people. And, but it was interesting doing that. This is why podcast hosts exist. That actually, if you are a proper podcast host, you have a much better deal with whether it's Amazon or whether it's someone else, and so therefore you can actually do quite nicely in terms of the numbers that you end up doing. But yes, it is very expensive to do it for yourself. There are cheaper ways of doing that, but they're nowhere near as effective. And of course, you need to write your own RSS feeds. You need to do all of that kind of stuff and everything else. The interesting thing, though, that I did see is if you look at our costs, our monthly costs, then $42 to serve our audio, but also $11 just to serve our RSS feed. We've only got one RSS feed, but it's costing us a quarter of all of the audio just to serve the RSS feed. So it just goes to show that the conversations that we've heard in the past, especially from our sponsors, Buzzsprout, about being cautious not to add too much to the RSS feed is absolutely well-founded. If you can see that, 25% of our cost is actually just serving the RSS feed.
Moving on, James, then. Right, so last week we heard the wonderful stat from YouTube, 1 billion viewers, active monthly viewers, and we thought, wow, that's amazing. Well done, YouTube. Not everyone's quite convinced that that's true, or maybe they might think, what's behind that number? So John McDermott, friend of the show, wrote a Substack blog post about YouTube's claim for 1 billion monthly active viewers, and then he did some stats, James. What did he do?
Yes, so he pointed out, and maybe I should have done this when I blindly reported the YouTube 1 billion monthly active viewers of podcast content. He pointed out that the population of the world is 8 billion,
So already YouTube podcasting reaching 1 in 8 people. He also points out the fact that 60% of podcasts are in English, which would tend to suggest, I mean, certainly not everybody in the world speaks English, certainly good enough to enjoy an English language podcast. And actually, only 5.5 billion have internet access. So if you were to look at this, you could go, okay, so YouTube podcasts, realistically, YouTube podcasts are reaching about 1 in 5 people online. 1 in 5 people online. Is that creditable? Is that a believable stat? I don't know. But I don't know what a believable stat is. Spotify claims that it has 170 million people using podcasts on a monthly basis. Is 170 million believable? Probably. What would be believable from a YouTube point of view? A billion? 500 million? 250 million? I don't know. But it was interesting because it did make me sort of stop and think. Are YouTube podcasts really reaching 1 in 8 people on the planet? And I wasn't necessarily convinced that YouTube podcasts are, to be fair.
Well, I would add that there's one stat missing that I think that John hasn't looked at, which is an individual might have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 actual plays. But then John points back very clearly, it's active viewers, not views. So then my whole argument is then broken down. So that's what I originally thought.
Your argument is sort of slightly broken down, but what I would say is, what this doesn't say is logged in viewers. It just says 1 million viewers. Now, if I use YouTube and I don't sign in here at home, and then I use YouTube and I don't sign in at work, then I'm 2 people. I mean, I work from home, but you get my point. So, and actually, if I look at YouTube on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then I might not actually have the same IP address every single time, because I might have had 4 hours without any power, and it's reset my IP address. And so, therefore, you can see that. If YouTube's figure is signed-in viewers, well, that's very impressive. If YouTube's figure is using the IAB definition of a listener, which is a unique IP address and user agent, well, you can imagine that might be rather larger than it is, which is why Spotify's number of 170 million is interesting, because 170 million in terms of a number is 170 million signed-in users, because you can't listen if you're not signed in to anything on Spotify beyond 30 seconds. So I think there's definitely sort of something there. The devil is in that detail, and I don't think we've necessarily got that detail from the folks at YouTube.
I do worry that we talked about earlier radio reducing the listener from 5 minutes to 3 minutes to increase what would seem the amount of time people are listening to radio. I'm getting a little bit worried that we have this attention economy where clearly there's a lot of people watching YouTube, there's a lot of people listening to podcasts because the numbers are always going up, more going to radio, more to TV. I mean, where are these people? I don't have more than 24 hours in a day, and my attention span cannot increase, but seemingly the world is increasing the amount of time it spends online with all of these services.
Yes, and Edison's Infinite Dial is showing a bit more, and Edison's share of ear studies are showing, numbers in terms of total audio. Certainly numbers in terms of total audio consumed in the UK is going up, which is interesting. And so you get those sorts of figures. I have to say, I'm most interested in the number that we never see, which is time spent listening. And I would much rather have, attention is hard to measure, but time spent listening shouldn't be hard to measure, but we can't measure that. That is much harder to look at in terms of, we don't get that in terms of podcast stats unless you go and sign into the, Apple Podcast Connect and so on. That's the thing that I'm most interested in, is time spent listening. Actually, reach or cume is much less interesting to me than total time spent listening, and we have no open data which really shows that. The closest we can get is Radar in the UK has just released that 9% of time spent listening in the UK to audio is to podcasts. 9%. Now, 28% of people in the UK are listening to podcasts, but only 9% of time spent listening is to podcasts, which shows to me that there is considerable space in the growth of what we can achieve in terms of podcasting. Because, you know, if everybody listened twice as long, we could really succeed there. So I would love to see more of that data, but that data is much harder to come by. Interestingly, both Apple and Spotify both have that data. I've asked Apple, and they won't tell me how long people spend listening. YouTube are unlikely to tell me that. Spotify unlikely to end up telling me that either. But they are the people with that data, and it'd be fun to find out, wouldn't it?
Well, that, I think, is what the bumper dashboard's trying to do, isn't it? It's trying to aggregate that first-party data into a client view. And as you said earlier, they're not doing it through an official API. They're getting their clients to give them
Apple.
access.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, we were sent an email from a friend of the show who has more concerns about YouTube numbers. They said, I've discovered something kind of suspicious that YouTube is doing with podcasts. And of course, that raises our interest. Some of the channels I watch, including Buzzsprout, have a bunch of random playlists that are not intended to be podcasts, but they've been marked as podcasts. Now, you read this as well, James. What were your thoughts?
Yes, it's interesting. So, YouTube sometimes just elects the fact that you have a show that looks a bit like a podcast and then ticks the podcast box in YouTube Studio. So therefore, it counts as a podcast for that 1 billion users number. And this listener tells us that YouTube appears to set a show as a podcast if the creator uses the word podcast in the title. So that's an easy way for YouTube to guess that it might be a podcast, except it might not be. And there are some good examples of something that is weirdly marked as a podcast, even though it really isn't. So that I thought was interesting, because actually we got last week the definition of a podcast from YouTube, and that definition was the creator has ticked the box marked podcast. Anyway, it now turns out that YouTube is ticking that box for creators in some cases as well. So there's a thing.
Now, Spotify Open Access, which I think is badly named. I don't know why it's called Open Access, but we'll come back to that in a minute. iVoox, or however you're supposed to say it, has announced an integration with the Spotify Open Access. What have they done, James?
Yeah, so iVoox or iVoox, I don't actually know. They have, they're a podcast hosting company, and they have a system with their app which allows you to pay for a podcast, pay access to a podcast, but of course it only works on their app. And so they've signed up with Spotify Open Access so that if you want to, you can also listen to that show through Spotify as well. I think you still have to sign up on this podcast website, but you can then listen in your Spotify app rather than in the iVoox app. That's a pretty standard Spotify Open Access thing that isn't meant to be anything more than, you've paid for this content, you can listen to it in the Spotify app, because that's where you listen to everything else. So there's no conversation around security or anything else. It's just a no auth sign in. Super easy, super straightforward.
But I would say it is security, because what they're doing is passing a token back through the OAuth to say, yes, we confirm that this content has been paid for, therefore you can allow it to be streamed on Spotify. That's the way it works. And
yes.
I think
that's certainly security. But what they're not doing is there isn't
There isn't a way of downloading that content as a specific file as there would be in an open podcast player, because Spotify doesn't work that way.
Now, Spotify, we've talked about YouTube doing some slightly weird things. Spotify seems to be doing the same. We also had an email from somebody saying that the numbers are out now for the Spotify partner program related to video. And the highlight of that email to me was video versions of their podcast. This is clients of this company throughout January who enrolled in the Spotify partner program actually lost them nearly $1,000.
Yes.
How do you lose $1,000? I mean, what, do you negatively play something? I mean, I don't get that. How do you lose $1,000, James?
Well, so this story, and we covered it this week in the Pod News newsletter. It's from Amanda McLaughlin, who works at Multitude, but it's an anonymous client of hers. This particular podcast was using SPAN, the Spotify Advertising Network, i.e., ads in the middle of a show, audio ads, was using that to monetize, but getting an awful lot of their plays through the Spotify platform. Now, as we know, when you turn into video, then it takes the audio from the RSS feed away, and all you get to listen to in your Spotify app is the soundtrack of the video. And that essentially means that you can't do any programmatic advertising anymore. You can't do any dynamic advertising built into that. It is just purely the soundtrack of the video. So therefore, actually, yes, they got a payout in January, $579. Hooray! But they didn't get the normal payouts that they would have done through SPAN from the dynamic ads that were put into their audio, of somewhere like $1,500. So as a result, paying all of this extra money to make videos, then uploading those up to Spotify has ended up essentially losing them, $1,500 from the podcast, and they only earned $597 from the video version. So it's clearly not worth their while, and they're opting out of that. I think this goes to show that, again, the devil is in the detail in terms of how the Spotify partner program for video works. And yes, and for this particular client, they were earning much more from their audio show than they were from video, and it was a mistake for them to start uploading the video stuff, quite apart from the additional costs of that.
I love the line here. She goes, "This stings particularly for us when Spotify just claimed that the Spotify partner program made hundreds of podcast creators $10,000 plus in January. That claim sounds impressive on the face of it," she says, "but how much of this SPAN revenue did those creators lose?"
Correct.
Again, what did they get? So she's actually, her client has decided to opt out of this partner program from Spotify and stop pivoting fully to video. And again, yeah, as you said, devil in the detail, and the detail seems to be it's not worth it right now.
And I'm surprised that Spotify hasn't clearly done the maths in terms of that, because, one would assume that Spotify would have worked out how to get the maths to balance so that you would earn more from the video stuff that they clearly want rather than from the audio stuff. But they seemingly haven't actually done that, which is, a surprising thing.
I've just got to read it from what she said. "My client and I decided to opt out of the SPP program, Spotify Partner Program. But in the meantime, they're requiring podcasters to give up a proven revenue stream for an untested program with secretive maths."
Yes,
that is it.
Yes.
You can't say it better than that, really.
Yes, no, it's really good. So yes, it's well worth a peek. You'll find that in Wednesday's Pod News daily newsletter.
Let's move on, James. Let's fly around the world a little bit. What's going on in Canada?
Yes, let's do this nice and quickly. So in Canada, there's a new online magazine for Canadian podcasters launched. It's called Canadian Podcaster, and it's free. If you prefer a newsletter, you can also, of course, get Pod the North, which is very good. Down in Australia, ARN, who runs iHeart, they have announced a cost-cutting exercise over the next 3 years. Flat revenues for that company here in Australia, it actually went up overall, but only because they own some posters in Hong Kong, would you believe? But anyway, flat revenues
Thank God for
here in
posters,
Australia, yes, but their digital online revenues are up 28%, which arguably means that their broadcast radio revenues were down. But anyway, they only made 15.7 million US dollars in terms of digital audio anyway, but and so that may be one of the reasons why they're looking at a cost-cutting exercise. Of course, SCA, which is their competitor, made a ton of redundancies, eliminated a ton of roles, if I can talk American there for a second, only a couple of weeks ago. Talking about eliminating roles, WNYC in New York is getting rid of a further 21 full-time roles, according to their CEO, LaFontaine Oliver, who said how much that it was sad and that it pained him. So far as we can work out, he's earning around $800,000 a year, probably not paining him that month. Monk Studios in Berlin appears to be not having a particularly good time of it. They've lost their managing director, and it looks as if that company is winding down, although Monk Studios elsewhere seems to be doing quite well. Finally, in the UK, more details from Rajar in terms of podcast listening. Rajar saying that podcast listening is 26% of all British adults, but as I may have mentioned earlier in this podcast, if I haven't edited it out, only 6% of all audio listening. Even, by the way, the most popular age group for podcasts, which is 25 to 34s, which I thought was interesting. But the most popular age group for podcasts only get 11% of all audio time. Live radio, of course, doing significantly higher in terms of that. I was interested in seeing that popular age group for podcasters thing being 25 to 34. What is going on with the 14 or the 15 to 25 group, I wonder? Because
they're still stuck on TikTok and Snapchat and all those other things.
Well, yeah, and if they're still stuck on that, then in 10 years' time they will be the 25 to 34s, and will they be switching over to podcasts by then? I don't know.
I mean, anecdotally, on a sample of 2, but. Yeah. So don't hold me to this, people. But I look at their age and taste changes. You know, they're in the attention model of TikTok, and you know that quick fix, and then eventually they get a little bit more into commuting, and then they're going on trains and they're getting into work, and other people have influenced them. Yeah, there's the commuting, which is a definite thing. Yeah, no, absolutely. People News, congratulations Ruth Fitzsimons, who many will know from Audioboom or from Sports Social or from Podfront UK. She is now Director of Digital for Bauer Media in Ireland. So congratulations to her. They own radio companies over there and magazines and things. So that's nice. And Christopher Avello has joined Libsyn as VP of Marketing. Now, he is an interesting person. He'd worked for Audible for a considerable amount of time, 14 years, I think. And so he completely gets how to market audio. Completely gets that. He's also worked for an audiobook seller as well called Chirp. And now he's working for Libsyn, which of course going to Athens in Greece this weekend. There's a big radio and podcasting conference going on there, Radio Days Europe, which starts on Monday. I am down as a speaker on Monday, and I'm down as a speaker on Tuesday. And we'll see quite how that works. More details coming up. Let's do the... and there is one more thing, which is, of course, the PodCamp, podcamp.live, to find out more information about that, which is happening in London same week as the podcast show in London. How is that going for you, Sam? It's going well. I mean, we've got more speakers lined up. I've got a very important call today, straight after this, with Jason from the London Podcast Show.
Oh, yes.
So I really hope... Am I asking a favour? Of course I'm asking a favour. Yes.
Yes.
Blag, steal and borrow. Yes. Yes. Please, please, please. But and then after that, I will really accelerate into what we're doing. But
Yes.
it is a case
you need
of
a home
we've had
first.
to tread water. Yeah,
Yes,
we've
you
had
need
to
a home
tread water,
first.
and it's not what I wanted, but we'll get there.
Indeed.
So more details. Fingers crossed next week.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology. Gosh, we've talked technology quite a lot already. But let's have a little bit more technology. Trident Digital,
Yes.
you say?
Well, I don't really. I just copied what you wrote. So you say. Go on. You tell me.
Well, our good friends at Omni Studio have announced a thing called podcast feed drops, and it's essentially an easy way for podcasters to get additional shows into their feeds. If you're a big podcaster like ARN in Australia who've been using this already, it allows you to cross-promote new shows that you have, and they've just basically built the tools to enable that to happen. So they've built a few other, interesting things there as well. Interestingly, Omni Studio apparently hosts over 70,000 podcasts across the world. So there is a thing. What else is going on? Spotify seems to be launching social things. Have they actually launched that yet, or is this still sort of playing around?
Yeah, some of it's launched, some of it's coming. So if you go to your user settings, you can now see the social settings in your player. They are going to allow you to show what playlists you have on your profile and who's listening to what and who's currently active. Some of that was there before when they had Spotify, the sidebar, which linked into Facebook, but now they're bringing that back into their own platform. And then in the beta, they've got new emojis around comments and stuff. So now you can put hearts, likes, thumbs up, all those sorts of silly things. So they are trying to get more into social. I'm not sure how well it will be when you move it to mobile.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's what you've got in terms of YouTube, which has a bunch of social things, lots of comments, lots of, thumbs up and thumbs down and everything else, which even works in terms of YouTube Music as well. So perhaps they're just chasing their competitors there in terms of that. YouTube Music, by the way, this week, saying that they now have 100 million paid subscribers to YouTube Music, which is nice.
We need to check those numbers as well, though, James.
Albeit 265 million are subscribed to Spotify, so they've still got quite a long way to catch up. True Fans, which apparently is a podcast app. Do you know anything about True Fans, Sam?
No, let's move on.
You're now supporting OPML, both in and out, which is a nice thing. OPML is not quite as easy as it looks, is it?
No, but actually, the standard's pretty good. I mean, although most of the apps, or I'd say the apps, implement it two different ways. It's like some apps implement OPML 1 and some apps implement OPML 2. So there's just a difference in one of the tags. So we decided to support them both at all. And then we started to support import and export. And then when we looked around for testing, so we did Fountain, we did AntennaPod, Podverse, all the others. They all work. We got them working. And then we noticed quite a few of them don't do export. And we thought, oh.
Yes. Funny that. You can get your data in, but it'll never leave. Yes.
And you did ask me why I didn't name them. And I'm going to say now, because I do this show. And well, no, genuinely, look.
Don't feel that you're
no,
held back.
Look, I have to tread a fine line, James. One, I'm very cognizant that Pod News is your brand, right? And True Fans is mine, as CEO. But, I can't. If I shout out certain apps who are my competitors and I go, ha, you don't do it, we do, blah, 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 right? Then when I want to interview them for this show or you need them, then I think I might, cause an issue. So I am very careful and cautious not to be negative and call people out. I will say you can go and look and see for yourself and it will become very obvious, but I won't name them, no.
A couple of other things going on. Deepcast has done some interesting things, rebranding their Deepcast Pro product, which I never fully understood who that was for. It's now called Deepcast Creator. They've launched a thing called Podsites, which is a turnkey website solution for podcasters. One of the things that I'm actually waiting for is I'm waiting for somebody to essentially make, and maybe Godcaster is the closest to this, somebody to essentially make a thing that looks like a podcast app. It might happen to be on a website, but it looks like a podcast app, but it's just for one podcast. I think that's probably where the future is, and quite a lot of these pod sites or Podpage or other similar services are busy building a fully featured website. I think just having a player that looks like an app basically would be a really interesting idea. So that's a thing.
Yeah, I think, we talked about it a few weeks ago, how, a lot of the hosts have their own web pages. And again, I can see these being improved over time. Again, there was a proposal in the Podcasting 2.0 for a banner tag, and there was a whole discussion, which I actually tuned out of, about images last week.
Yes, I don't blame you.
Yeah, I was like, should I listen to images or should I go out with my wife? I'm going out with my wife. I haven't really
I don't blame you. I did enjoy, there were two things that I enjoyed about the Podcasting 2.0 show last week. One of them was Adam Curry, again, saying how much he enjoyed speaking at a conference and how amazing it was and how he got so many people oohing and ahhing about Podcasting 2.0, and then in the next breath saying, but I'm not going to do it again. So I thought that was great. But also, secondly, Dave Jones, who has been implacably opposed to getting rid of the podcast images tag because it has completely failed, then turns around and says, well, maybe we deprecate the podcast images tag. And I go, really?
Boostergram, super comments, zaps, fan mail, super chats, and email. Our favorite time of the week, it's the Pod News Weekly Review inbox.
Yeah, so many different ways to get in touch with us. There's fan mail by using the link in our show notes. There's super comments on True Fans, boosts everywhere else, or email, and we share any money that we make too. Now, I have had 4 hours of no power, and one of the things that hasn't rebooted cleanly is my home assistant, so therefore I'm sitting in mostly darkness now. And the other side is the Umbral box, which has also failed, which I need to give a tickle to. So there may very well be boosts waiting for me on the Umbral box. My apologies, but I won't be able to read those this week. However, we do have some excellent news. We have a 17th supporter, a sweet
Hooray.
17 supporter.
I feel there should be a jingle right now, but I don't know what it would be. Right.
Yes, exactly. So thank you to Brian Ensminger. Brian is super helpful and useful in the Hindenburg community on Facebook, among many other things. Super useful in terms of that. So Brian, thank you so much for that. You join the rest of the power supporters, who are David John Clark, James Burt, John McDermott, Claire Waite-Brown, Eileen Smith, Neil Velio, Rocky Thomas, Jim James, David Marsell, Cy Jobling, Rachel Corbett, Dave Jackson, Mike Hamilton, Matt Medeiros, Marshall Brown, and Cameron Moll. We really appreciate that. That money is split equally between Sam and I. I know that Sam spends it all on wine. No, he doesn't spend any of it on wine.
I don't spend any of it on wine because I'm a wine importer. I don't have to. Yes,
of course. No. He spends it all on True Fans, I believe. So that's always a good plan.
That's so true.
Yes, and I save it for a rainy day. But we really appreciate that. So thank you so much for that. Now, we would like to know, is there anything, obviously, if you're a power supporter, you get to come on this show once a year and you get to tell us what the future of podcasting will be, which we do at the end of every year, which we will be doing again. Is there anything else that you want from us, power supporters? If you would like something like a WhatsApp group to annoy everybody else with, or
something else like that. I don't know. What would you like? Is there something that you would like, or are you perfectly happy just supporting us? We would love to know. You can send us an email, weekly@podnews.net, and even if you're not a power supporter yet, you can say what might make you become a power supporter. Is there something that you would like? Is it a meetup at Evolutions, where I put some money behind the bar and you can drink your money back again? I don't know.
One straw, one bottle, that's all he does, mate.
Yes, that'll be, because I'm not a beer importer. Then please do let us know. Weekly@podnews.net is the right address to catch both Sam and I. So, what's happened for you this week, Sam?
Well, first of all, I spoke to David John Clark and I found out his secret, but I'm not allowed to tell you now anymore. So now I know I can't say. So, yes, but there you go. So, congratulations, David, by the way. Yes, well done to you. Now, moving on, we obviously did the OPML, which we talked about earlier. We've also added, finally, the OAuth support to Blue Sky, which is an absolute dog. So well done to Transistor for doing it. It took us hours to do that one.
Right.
And you know, I don't understand why they've made it so complex, but now you can publish your activity, not just comments, out of TrueFans to your profile if you wish. And of course, in your user settings, you can choose what's published, anything or nothing or something. So yeah, things like you can publish your play, listen time, whatever you want, comments. James, you had a bit of a comment about LinkedIn this week. What would you like to say about LinkedIn? Because I've got it here if you want.
what I like about Mastodon is that I can say things and very few people read it, and so that's okay. And or at least I think that's the case. But certainly when a slightly rude comment about LinkedIn that I posted, basically saying it's full of self-important wankers trying to show off and brag about fake accomplishments, and then adding if you're American, a very rude word coming up if you're an American. If you're not an American, this is absolutely fine. But I then added, I try to keep up, but honestly, it's a shower of utter tits, isn't it? Yes, I wasn't necessarily expecting that to reach as many people as it did, but there we are. Yes, gosh, I hate LinkedIn. I really do hate LinkedIn. But yes, if you think that it will be useful to auto-post to LinkedIn, then I'm sure that that's a wonderful thing. Yes. But you're going to also launch a social sidebar. It's almost as if you've looked at Spotify and you've gone, oh, that looks like a good idea. I'll do that.
Strangely, yes.
Why not? But why not? I think that's a great idea. I would love more social stuff. I mean, obviously be careful being a social podcast app, but I would love more social stuff. And certainly in terms of Spotify, I discover new music that way because I go, oh, I respect this man or this woman I'm listening to, I notice that they're listening to such and such, I'll go and listen to that.
And that is all it is. Yeah. So we're recording on Wednesday, but by Friday, you'll be able to click on an icon in the header, which will just show you the people you've chosen to follow and those people, what they are currently playing live or what they played in the last 7 days. So it's their last activity. We're not going to give you the last 25 things they've done. You can then go and look at that in another way. That's available. But no, it's just a nice social sidebar, which allows you to go and discover quickly. Yeah.
Yes. No, that is all excellent. You've also launched a podcast, which is called Fan Zone. Now, you say it is now on newpodcasts.net.
No, I don't say that. I said it's going to be.
There you go. Because I was there looking at the approval queue and going, no, it's not.
No, not yet.
It's been really interesting looking at newpodcasts.net, looking and seeing who's using it, who's sticking stuff in, how they're writing it, because I'm going in and rewriting them. But it's much easier going in and rewriting than starting from scratch. So, so it's been really useful doing that. Newpodcasts.net if you want to take a peek. Don't go to http:/newpodcasts.net because that I discover doesn't work at all at the moment. For some reason, I need to forward non-secure stuff over, but I'll get that sorted at some point. But yes, so that is going well. It says here investor meetings. That's investor meetings for true fans.
Indeed, yeah. I had
that's sounding positive.
Very. So again, we are very, very close to announcing. But then I got taken last night to another investor circle jerk, where
Yes.
basically
Was it on LinkedIn?
Oh, I think they all were. I certainly had people asking me for it. No, it was just that I haven't been to these for years, and it was one where you get the I've made my 55 million quid, and this is how I did it. I was a scrappy this, that, and they sit at the front and tell you their life story of how they've made it, and everyone in the room oohs and ahs at things, and then everyone tries to get to that person, or they try to. It was just awful. I hated every minute of that meeting last night.
Well,
I just wanted to leave.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take your money, but please don't make me do those things again. They are boring. They really are.
Well, there we are.
But there you go.
Yes. Yes, I would love to avoid any of those. Are you doing any more of these Thames walks?
Yeah, we're just going to, obviously have tea with Charles now Zelensky's left. We're going to go and pop into Windsor, have a little cup of tea with Charles and head over to Henley. So that's the next stage of our walk, yes. So looking forward to that.
Very nice.
Come on, James, what's happening for you? What's happened?
It was announced at the end of last week that I will be co-presenting the Infinite Dial 2025 from Edison Research. Yeah, I'm super excited. I've got no idea why, but super excited. Presented in a free webinar on Thursday, March the 20th. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be very early in the morning for me. But I would very much appreciate your company on that. Edison Research Vice President Megan Lazovic is doing all of the hard work, and I am occasionally butting in and asking some questions, I have a feeling. Thank you to Odyssey and Cumulus Media and SiriusXM Media for paying for some of the research as well. It's a piece of research that I have been reading for the last 15 years, and I'm super excited to be actually co-presenting it. No idea why, but that's going to be great fun. So very much looking
your
forward.
heroes, but there you go.
I know, very much looking forward to doing that. The Pod News report card closes on Sunday. That has been really interesting to run this year. We've got a few questions to ask you. If you haven't yet filled it in, please do. podnews.net/report card. It essentially helps podcast companies prioritize the work that they have to do, the big podcast platforms. That would be really useful. This year, we managed to get targeted by bots. So I know that I've had 20,000 people taking part, but I also know that 19,500 of those are robots. But the good news is I've got some code on that page which is sorting that out for me. So it's one SQL query and then they've all gone, which is significantly more than I managed last year. So yes, I'm very much looking forward to that. And why are we recording on Wednesday? Well, we're recording on Wednesday because of Tropical Cyclone Alfred.
Good morning from what has been a wild night here on the Gold Coast. Cyclone Alfred now just hours away from making landfall. Right now across southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, everyone is feeling the full force of this storm. The southern Gold Coast copping wind gusts of 100 k's an hour, recording wave heights of around 12 metres. And across the border, the Northern Rivers region already drenched. 150 millimetres of rain falling in Lismore in just the last 24 hours. And the worst of these conditions is still to come.
It's going to be pretty damaging. I mean, everything is talking about, everywhere is closed from tomorrow, Thursday on. We're certainly planning to lose power again and to lose internet and everything else. I'm going to be writing Friday's Pod News later on today, Wednesday, just so that it's there, just so that I've got something. It's the first tropical cyclone that I've ever lived through, and my goodness, it's quite scary. It's quite scary. The only slight problem that I've got is I am supposed to be flying to Radio Days Europe in Athens in Greece on Friday afternoon.
I wouldn't do it.
That plane lands into Brisbane Airport, should be landing into Brisbane Airport Friday morning at 6:30 in the morning. It won't be, I'll tell you that for now. And so therefore, I'm definitely not flying on the Friday. I don't think I'll be flying on the Saturday because I don't think there'll be a plane ready and waiting for me because, of course, it has to land Saturday morning, and and Friday is the big day. So I have a feeling that I'm going to have to call off going to Athens, which is a real shame because I've been to every single radio days that have ever existed. So that's a frustration, but still, there we are. Better to be, alive, I suppose.
I think the word's safe than sorry.
Yes, exactly. But yes, so if you're wondering, particularly why the Pod News newsletter has looked a bit sparse over the last couple of days, and I've not replied to any of your emails, then that's probably why. I've had quite a lot going on, so we'll see how all of that works. But yeah, I've never listened to as much ABC local radio as I have, but learning all about stuff. I mean, sandbags, for example, because obviously a cyclone brings floods, and so sandbags.
You live on a hill.
I know I live on a hill, but lots of people don't, and a 250,000 sandbags have been given out over the last couple of days. It's astonishing. I mean, really, really quite something. So you get an awful lot of you get wind up to 120 kilometers an hour, and then you get all of the rain, and it's the rain which is going to be really hard. And then everything finishes, and you go, "Oh, that's lovely." And then you realise that you're in the eye of the storm, and then everything happens all over again. But yeah, it's going to be quite a thing. Anyway, so there we are. So good luck for me.
Look on James's YouTube channel for videos of the cyclone.
Yes, don't look on my YouTube channel because all you'll see is random pictures of me finding bugs in pieces of home electronics. But still, but yes, it's going to be an interesting time, shall we say? Anyway, that's it for this week. All of our podcast stories taken from the Pod News daily newsletter, podnews.net.
You can support this show by streaming sats. You can give us feedback using the Buzzsprout fan mail link in our show notes. You can send us a super comment or become a power supporter like the sensational. Now it's got to be the Sweet 17 now, hasn't it, James? At weekly.podjuice.net.
Yes, our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use Clean Feed for our audio. We edit with Hindenburg, and we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Start podcasting. Keep podcasting.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show. Support us. The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.
Democracy depends on a free press. Please support our independent journalism at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Ukraine has agreed to a Trump administration proposal for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia as the United States resumes military assistance and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. In exchange, Ukraine has agreed to sign a deal granting U.S. access to Ukraine's oil, natural gas, and mineral resources as soon as possible. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly video address to Ukrainians that he had accepted the deal following talks in Saudi Arabia.
During today's talks, the American side proposed taking a first step forward, establishing a full ceasefire for 30 days, not just stopping missiles, drones, and bombs, not just ensuring security in the Black Sea, but implementing a complete ceasefire along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal. We see it as a positive and are ready to take this step.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he would press Moscow to agree to the deal, adding, quote, "The ball is now in their court." Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russian officials are scrutinizing publicly released statements about the ceasefire proposal and did not rule out a phone call between Putin and Trump in the coming days. Overnight, Russia launched another wave of drone and missile attacks on Ukraine. 1 woman was killed, 9 wounded in a Russian strike on Kryvyi Rih, while in the port city of Odessa, 4 Syrian sailors were killed when a Russian ballistic missile struck a vessel loading wheat for export to Algeria. Israel's military has stepped up attacks on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 8 people over the past 24 hours, despite the ongoing ceasefire agreement. Among the dead are a Palestinian girl who was shot and killed by Israeli forces near Deir al-Balah, and 4 Palestinians killed in an airstrike near an Israeli checkpoint in central Gaza. This is the father of one of the victims.
Did we end the war or not? We don't know. Sometimes they say the first phase of the ceasefire has been extended, and sometimes they say the Israelis are not accepting the deal. We cannot say anything other than, may God take revenge on those who caused this.
With Israel's total blockade of food, fuel, and humanitarian aid to Gaza now in its 12th day, the Gaza Bakers Union reports 6 of the territory's 22 remaining bakeries shut down after they ran out of cooking gas. On Tuesday, the charity MSF, Doctors Without Borders, strongly condemned the Israeli-imposed siege on the Gaza Strip, writing, quote, Israeli authorities are yet again normalizing the use of aid as a negotiation tool. This is outrageous. Humanitarian aid should never be used as a bargaining chip in war, they said. On Tuesday, Israeli forces arrested dozens of people in the occupied West Bank, killing 4 people during raids around the city of Jenin. Among the victims is 58-year-old grandmother Faiza Ibrahim Abu Ghali, who was shot and killed when Israeli soldiers raided her home. Her 7-year-old grandson was reportedly among family members detained, then later released by Israeli forces. 14 members of Congress have signed a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem demanding the release of recent Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil, a permanent resident of the U.S. who was arrested by immigration authorities for helping organize campus protests in solidarity with Palestinians. The 14 lawmakers, all Democrats, write, quote, Khalil's constitutional rights have been violated. He's been denied meaningful access to counsel and any visitation from his family. This is absolutely unacceptable and illegal, the letter said. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt argued Secretary of State Marco Rubio has broad authority under the Cold War era Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952 to declare someone deportable.
The administration believed that it needs to charge a green card holder with a crime to be eligible for deportation.
Well, in fact, Secretary Rubio reserves the right to revoke the visa of Mahmoud Khalil.
Khalil's attorneys are set to face off today in a New York court with Trump officials who want him deported. Khalil, who is being held at an ICE jail in Gina, Louisiana, will not be present at his hearing. On Tuesday, at least a dozen people were arrested in New York City as hundreds gathered to demand his release. Protests in solidarity with Khalil have spread to campuses nationwide. This is Graham Blair, a political science professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where hundreds rallied on Tuesday.
Students are rightly scared, and I'm scared, frankly, because not only is the Trump White House deciding to target peaceful protesters because of their views about the war in Gaza and the complicity of our university in funding it, but they are being helped by university administrators around the country.
The House of Representatives has approved a short-term spending bill to keep the government funded through the end of September. One Democrat voted with 216 Republicans to approve the bill, which looks to slash $13 billion in non-military spending while boosting funds for veterans' health care and the Pentagon. Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries condemned the spending bill, saying it, quote, rips away life-sustaining health care and retirement benefits from everyday Americans.
It's all part of a broader scheme to pass massive tax cuts for billionaire donors, the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and then to stick working-class Americans